Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, One Person, Many Roles, Thriving Personally and Professionally in a Remote Working World. This webinar is part of Georgetown McDonough's Stanton Distinguished Leader Series. The Stanton Distinguished Leader Series brings Georgetown University leaders who are renowned in their fields to share their unique experiences with students and alumni, as well as to engage in dialogue about leadership in an ever-changing world. The series was made possible through the support of Georgetown parents Daniel and Mary Stanton, and we are grateful to them for their dedication to Georgetown McDonough. This summer, we will host a handful of special Stanton virtual programming opportunities that highlight McDonough's work with technology, dignity, and the future of work. My name is Sean McGilly, and I am the Director of Corporate and External Partnerships for Georgetown McDonough, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to share a few webinar tips and reminders. This webinar broadcast is being recorded. The recording of this webinar will be made available on Georgetown McDonough's YouTube channel soon after today's broadcast. Our panelists will take a few questions towards the end of today's program. Thank you to those who have already submitted your questions. Please do feel free to send in your questions as you have them throughout today's program using the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Finally, if you're having any technical difficulties or other issues, please submit those concerns to our tech team via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Today's webinar is moderated by Professor Jason Schloetzer. Professor Schloetzer is the William and Karen Sonneborn Associate Professor of Business Administration. His research involves collaborations with companies to study the impacts of changes in corporate policies on employee and firm performance. He has presented his academic research at numerous universities and conferences, including twice at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Jason frequently presents at events attended by C-suite executives and corporate directors, and is often quoted in media outlets including Bloomberg, Reuters, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. At Georgetown, he teaches courses about how to use accounting data to make business decisions and to evaluate firm performance. Now, without further ado, I'm pleased to turn things over to Jason to begin today's discussion and to introduce today's panelists. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Sean, for the introduction, and thanks to both you and Lauren Apicella for your support in organizing today's webinar. I would also like to thank Michael O'Leary and Nick Lovegrove of the McDonough School, as well as Matt Breitfelder of Apollo Global Management for many insightful discussions about today's topic on remote work. Today's discussion, as Sean alluded to, is the first in a series of events and activities that are associated with the McDonough School's new Technology, Dignity, and Future of Work initiative. This initiative draws from the diverse perspectives of MSB community to provide thought leadership on how emerging technologies are reshaping the workplace. Grounded in the Jesuit Catholic belief in the dignity of work, the initiative is in the midst of developing a research, curriculum, and outreach agenda designed to extend our understanding of the broad issues that are emerging as new technologies impact the future of work and the skills that we need to be successful. Consistent with the initiative's mission, our discussion today focuses on emerging technologies, such as cloud-based video conferencing platforms, and how they are changing both the nature of work and also how work affects our daily lives and our personal attitudes. Remote work is clearly changing the nature of work. Millions of people around the world are now working from home or flexible workspaces. Companies are starting to recognize the benefits of remote work. A recently released poll suggests that 2/3 of large companies are going to allow their employees to continue working remotely even after this pandemic ends. And several high-profile US and international companies have announced that tens of thousands of their employees across a wide variety of job functions will never return to the office and will instead engage in remote work for the foreseeable future or a permanent basis. Remote work is also affecting our daily lives and personal attitudes. Surveys suggest that some employees believe remote work has made them happier and more productive, enabling them to avoid long commutes and work in a more relaxed environment, while other employees are experiencing remote work in a very different way. These employees believe that remote work is simply unsustainable because it's resulted in overloaded schedules and longer, non-traditional working hours. These employees are reporting signs of burnout and an erosion of the collaborative workplace culture. Given all of this, it's readily apparent that remote work requires a new skill set to succeed. It is true both for employees in general and for caregivers in particular, who might struggle with striking the right balance between remote work and the need to care for young children, elderly parents, or a loved one with special needs. Today, we'll discuss these challenges with our two distinguished panelists. Our first panelist is Daisy Dowling. She is the founder and CEO of Workparent, a specialty consulting firm that provides advice and solutions to working parents and the organizations that employ them. Her clients include Dow Jones, KKR, Paul Weiss, Edward Jones, and the US Air Force. In addition, Daisy created and writes the Harvard Business Review's first column on working parent issues. This is a wonderful column, and I've read many of her articles, and I encourage you to also read them. Beyond HBR, her work has also been published in prominent news outlets such as the New York Times and the Washington Post, academic journals such as the Journal of Applied Corporate Finance, and she's been featured in a variety of news outlets, including the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal. Prior to founding Workparent, Daisy served as managing director and head of talent development for Blackstone and as principal of Kitty and Partners, an international business psychology and leadership development consulting firm. She and her husband are the proud full-time caregivers of two young children. Welcome to today's discussion, Daisy.
Thank you so much for having me.
And our second panelist is Kelsey Lents. She is the CEO and co-founder of Two Birds, which merges fully licensed childcare with the co-working model. Two Birds closes the gap between shifting professional trends and traditional childcare. It does this by redefining the culture around working parenthood to help new parents thrive and enable employers to support their working parents. Kelsey's background involves architecture, business, the liberal arts, and teaching. She has received degrees from Yale and Columbia and has recently earned her MBA from the McDonough School of Business. Her background in teaching began with a Fulbright grant for work in Berlin, and she's been a lecturer at Columbia and the Parsons School of Design. Kelsey is also the proud full-time working parent of two young children who both attend Two Birds. Welcome to today's discussion, Kelly.
Thank you.
Sorry, Kelsey.
No worries.
Daisy, I'll begin with you. So you've written extensively about how working remotely is a distinct professional career skill that requires conscious effort and specific tactics in order to succeed. What are the most important pieces of advice you would give a caregiver who is new to the remote working world?
So I have a couple of very tactical pieces of advice, but the first and most important thing I would encourage anybody with a complex life or caregiving they have to do who's now working remote is to first take some of the pressure off yourself. I think there's a feeling that because you're working at home and because you're a diligent, dedicated professional, that not only should you be doing your job the way you've done it before and full-time caregiving, but if you believe what's out there in a lot of the media, you should also be, writing the great American novel and baking your own sourdough bread and catching up on your entire Netflix queue. And you should also be doing all the things that you normally put pressure on yourself to do. Keep the house clean, not give the kids too much screen time, et cetera, et cetera. Particularly during this pandemic, it's essential to take some of the pressure off and to really focus on what your three key priorities are. The first is getting your job done, business continuity. The second is maintaining the health and safety of yourself and your family. And the third is making sure that you have enough energy and resilience to keep delivering on those first two. Now, with that big picture in mind, with some of the pressure down a little bit, you can focus on some of the more really effective tactical things that I always recommend to people who are working at home. The first is to think about ways in which you can make your work at home feel like work in a workspace, in your regular office, particularly if you've just recently transitioned. All of us have routines and rituals that may not even, be so conscious to us, may not be so evident to us, but the things that we do every single day when we go into work. We have a commute where we can sort of think ahead to our day. We get the same cup of coffee from Starbucks, we sit down at the same desk in the same cubicle, et cetera, et cetera. When you're working at home, it's really easy to feel like you have none of those routines and rituals, that there's no boundaries, that you're just, kind of wandering around with your laptop. So as much as you can, try and reestablish those or create new ones for yourself. That means establishing a dedicated physical workspace, even if it's, I live in a small New York City apartment, even if it's just, a corner of your bedroom or part of the dining table. It includes things like having rituals about when you start work and when you end work. So for example, if you only put your shoes on when you sit down to actually do work, or if you always reach out to a certain colleague at the start of your day, it's an important signal, and it lets you sort of get into the game, get into working in the same way that you would if you were in a workplace. I also really recommend having boundaries. So being clear with yourself when you are on and when you are off. It's a great way to prevent burnout, and it's a way also just to help you structure your day. So whether that's setting a clock and knowing that I'm going to work for these 90 minutes and then attend to my kids, or whether, again, it's a small ritual. One of my clients actually keeps sort of a stop sign, which is red on one side and green on the other. And when she stops work, she flips it. And when she starts work, she turns it around again. Whatever works for you, but really try and recreate work. And then finally, and I'm going to sound like I'm talking out of two different sides of my mouth here, but realize that it's going to be completely different. So think about ways you want to differentiate your work too. And for most of us, that's going to be in terms of our schedule. If you go into a workspace and you have your colleagues there, your boss there, you probably are used to being there for 8 hours at a time, 10 hours at a time or more, and focusing just on work during that time. Well, at home, you're going to be much more distracted just by what's around you. And if you're caregiving, it's going to be very, very hard to work for 8 uninterrupted hours. I just don't know that that's possible. So go with it and think about breaking up your day, blocking it out so that you're working more early in the morning before the kids get up. Or better yet, thinking about dividing your day into really short chunks. You probably can't focus for 2 or 3 hours at a time, but what about having 20 good minutes and then turning your attention to some of the homeschool stuff or some of the housework or whatever else you need to do? So those are just some of the top line ways, reducing the pressure and then thinking very tactically about how to make it the same as work and what's going to be different.
Yeah, I've even read how some people will go for a short drive in the morning just to recreate that feeling of getting ready to go to work. So I know that some people are certainly trying to get that day started and have some structure around it for sure.
Yeah, if you think of your favorite athlete or your favorite performer, and if you read up on them, most people who are in high pressured occupations like that all have what they refer to as a pre-game ritual. And it's the same thing. Just take a page from sports psychology and create your own pre-game rituals, even if it's just getting up, to work on a Tuesday.
Right. That's very interesting. That's very interesting. So Kelsey, you co-founded Two Birds as the mother of young children. As a caregiver working outside of a traditional office setting, how do you manage to lessen the interruptions that can undoubtedly happen when caring for young children while also building your new business?
Sure. So I think the first thing is to really understand what your children's schedule is and then craft what your work schedule is around that, particularly if you have young children. There's no real shoving a child's schedule into your schedule. Children have a cadence to their day and certain needs, and I think trying to fight that is an uphill battle that you won't necessarily win. So for me, when I first started Two Birds, my oldest son was a newborn, and it was really about understanding what his needs were during the typical work day. And then I did things like, I knew, for example, while I was nursing, he was going to be relatively quiet. So I tried, and I had a pretty predictable nursing schedule. So I tried to schedule all of my conference calls, for example, during that period of time, because it was time that I knew I could block off. I also inverted the workday in a lot of ways. So I started working quite a bit more in the evenings, but then embraced the fact that during the day I would be with my child. And I think that's a real mental shift. And so I think part of the success in trying to either build a new business or working from home while you have young children is embracing what, to Daisy's point, what the changes are. It's not going to be the same schedule. It's not going to be the same workflow or cadence or even amount of time that you have to dedicate to work. And so really understanding that and embracing that is very helpful, because otherwise you are constantly going to be feeling like you're fighting a losing battle of how to balance parenting and working. And then the other thing that was certainly a learning curve for me, and I think is for all new working parents, is trying to find ways to not work and parent simultaneously. That's a really tough thing to navigate, and it can feel like you are doing both kind of halfways. And so if you can carve out periods of the day when you know you will be able to focus on work, you will both feel better about the work you're doing as well as be more efficient. And you will also feel better about the fact that then the rest of the day you can really spend on your child. And the last thing I wanted to say about it is I also think, I don't think that we need to talk about kind of newness to working parenthood or having to juggle working and parenting in only terms of the challenges. I actually think working parents are incredibly powerful. My work is much more efficient, I think much more focused, much more targeted since having children, because my understanding of time is very different, and time is a luxury for me. So I have now learned to spend time where it matters most, both in my personal life and in my professional life. And what I have found from working with fellow working parents is they're really powerful about how they approach conversations and decision making and working with other people. And I now feel like the work that I do and the work that I do with fellow parents is just really focused and efficient in a way that I didn't have that experience prior to having kids.
So it sounds like, to get back to both of your ideas here in the first two questions, Kelsey, would you say it's fair that one of the ways that you take the pressure off is by simply recognizing you're not going to be able to change your young kid's schedule? So let's just take that as given and reduce the pressure of trying to control them, and instead build your schedule around them.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think the more, and obviously it takes some learning of what your child's schedule is. And I think one of the unique challenges with children is that as they age and grow, their schedules can also evolve. So there does need to be some flexibility there. But I think, yeah, exactly to your point, I think recognizing that, and then also being upfront about what that schedule is with, not just with yourself, but also with your colleagues or with your clients, because then you're setting kind of pretty clear expectations that you feel like you can meet, rather than feeling like you're constantly apologizing for time that you're not spending.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I've actually tried with my son at home to just take Thursdays off. Today's a special occasion. I wasn't able to do that, obviously. But just recognizing that Thursdays are off and I don't schedule any meetings on Thursdays takes that pressure off of, like you say, of apologizing all the time. Yeah. So Daisy, I have another question for you. Remote work can certainly seem isolating, and it can take somebody off the senior leader radar screen because you feel like you're working here at home by yourself and you don't have a chance to interact with your colleagues very much. And you can feel like you're being left out of the process of growing and developing professionally. So my question to you is, how can employees and caregivers who work remotely kind of take charge of their professional development to ensure that they continue to grow professionally and remain on the radar screen for promotion in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. Remote work is inherently isolating, and you're away. You don't have the benefit of bumping into people in the hallway, body language, seeing people in meetings. Just all those little pieces of information that you're both telegraphing and receiving every day. Those go away, and for most of the people who I talk to who work at home, it feels very odd to sort of recreate that communication. Like I'm not just going to call somebody just to call somebody. I'm going to call somebody when I need them, or I'll set up a Zoom meeting because we have to progress a project in a certain way. And that's efficient, which is important. That's great. But what it does is really in a way take your visibility and in some senses your value to your colleagues down, right? Because you're only delivering pieces of work. You're not there to collaborate, to share ideas, to give updates, to be a mentor, to be a resource, to motivate other people and to get motivation yourself. So I tell people who are working at home that if you don't feel a little bit awkward or uncomfortable by pushing yourself to kind of get out there and communicate with your boss, with colleagues, then you're probably not doing it enough. You're going to have to find sort of artificial, for lack of a better term, ways in which to reach out to people and recreate some of those touch points that you would normally have. As you do that, particularly if you're thinking about advancement, promotion, how do I stay on the senior radar screen? A couple of different sort of little hacks for that. The first thing that I really love to recommend to people is if you're trying to position your own work in a good light, is to brag about somebody else. If there's somebody on your team or a colleague who's done a great job and you can elevate that and say, hey, I don't know if you realized, but this other person did a terrific job on the project and it really helped us get this across the line effectively. You're not bragging about yourself. You don't look like a chest thumper or obnoxious. You're talking about somebody else and sort of giving them a high five remotely. But what you're also doing is saying, hey, I was part of this project that did really, really well. And part of my, collaboration was what made this work. So it's a great way to kind of showcase some of your work. Another idea is just to send more updates than you usually do. No matter how well-intentioned your boss is, your colleagues are, they are not clairvoyant, right? They don't know what you're doing in the day-to-day, and they can't possibly know until you tell them. And it can be tremendously reassuring for people when everybody's remote and everybody feels isolated to just get a quick email or message that says, hey, no emergency, nothing really big to report, but just wanted to let you know, here's the status of, everything that's going on. We're having a conference call to make these decisions this afternoon. All's going well, and I'll keep you posted again in a couple of days. So it just telegraphs you're on it, you're capable, you're delivering, you're a professional. And then finally, if you're really thinking about sort of advancing yourself and how you're showing up in a way that says, advance me, promote me, I have a good future here. I encourage everybody to think about their professional brand in a really concerted way and to sit down, to take an hour, 2, 3, whatever on a weekend, and to think what 5 to 7 adjectives you would want other people around you, your colleagues right now, to use to describe you. Maybe you're judicious, thoughtful, responsive. I don't, for every single one of us, it's going to be different. We'll have different words we would wish to be described. Because if you have that basic framework and those descriptors in mind, you'll be able to show up as that person and better leave that impression when it's a deliberate one. So those are just some of the ways to sort of stay on the radar, up, down, and sideways, and make sure that that image of you that's on the radar is a really positive one.
Yeah, those are good tips, not just for remote work, but just for kind of building your personal brand in general.
Yes, yeah, they just become sort of extra amped up when you're working remotely. One thing, if people feel hesitant about reaching out, if you're shy, if you're an introvert, if that's difficult for you for whatever way, I would encourage people to think in ruthless business terms about communication. If your work is your EBITDA, then communication is the multiple. And your value is only really going to go up. You can have a high EBITDA, but if you've got a low multiple, you're going to have a lower value. Amp up that multiple and your value is going to increase, and the perceived value will increase.
Yeah, and that's also good advice, I think, for workers who are just getting started, who maybe don't have such a large network inside the organization, and they need to work, a little bit harder in order to build their network inside the organization, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Thank you for that. Kelsey, another question for you. And this is kind of related to the idea that we need to increase our multiple by doing a little bit extra and pushing ourselves to do something more than we usually do. And this can create the situation where we have this 24/7, always on working culture that's enabled by technology. And it can be easy to have an overloaded to-do list and maybe even, like some employees report, have some feelings of just complete burnout. When you're building your business and balancing your life, how do you decide what to do, what to drop, and how do you organize your time?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, so there are kind of two ways to answer it. One is just more broadly, and then the other is specifically kind of in this COVID-19 world where everybody is working remotely. So I'll tackle that first. And I think, again, it's about setting really clear kind of expectations for yourself on what you would like your schedule to be. I think, for example, what we did in our own household is both my husband and I work full time, and we recognize that in a typical world, we would both be working 8 to 10 hours a day. And that wasn't possible while we were working remotely, caring for young children, and still trying to do our job. And so we split the workday into two. I took the morning shift in terms of parenting. My husband took the afternoon shift in terms of parenting, and then we both worked in the evening. And what that allowed us to do was to say, for myself, the mornings I was off of work. It was, and kind of similarly, Jason, to what you're saying, of Thursdays are just off for you, and that's time for you to spend with your son. Mornings were time for me with my children. I blocked that off completely in my calendar, so people knew not to schedule time with me during that time. My husband did the same thing in the afternoons. And it's difficult. It's really difficult to impose those boundaries because it's very different from this concept of always being available, which has kind of permeated our culture in general, and even more so now when everybody knows that people are at home and they're not, out in the world and otherwise occupied and always have their phones on them, et cetera. But I think, and that may need to be a conversation with your colleagues and with your clients about what schedule is feasible, but you do need to figure out what a possible schedule is for yourself, and as much as you are able to really stick to some of those boundaries. I also think on that end, it's important to find the time off. So if you are in a job that really bleeds into all hours of the day during the week, whether you have children or not, then setting aside the weekend, for example, to work. Or if the way that your work week is set up is that you are able to pick out more time during the week to be with your children, or you're taking some of the load off of your partner, for example, during the week, and the weekend is time for you to catch up for work, that's fine. Understanding that the schedule may look a little different. The cadence to the week may look a little different right now, but you do need to set some kind of clear timelines for yourself of when you're on and when you're off. And I think, everyone to some extent is a creature of habit. My 3-year-old, for example, when we set that schedule, he took to it like a duck to water. He, one morning I started to answer a phone call or read an email, and he said, "No, mommy, this is your time with me. This is daddy's work time." And there was an ease for him in understanding when he got to spend time with me, when he got to spend time with his father. And it alleviated a lot of the stress of, going back to your previous question, of interruptions, because he knew that during the morning he had my attention and he didn't need to interrupt his father, and vice versa. And I also think a lot of this 24/7 culture is about setting real goals and timelines and milestones for yourself. A huge part of building a business, particularly at the beginning, is creating work for yourself. And so in the beginning, before deadlines were imposed on us, we were the ones imposing deadlines. And so we created schedules around those deadlines. And then at some point that flips, and now it's people asking you for work. And so I think understanding what the schedule was when you were the one who had the power to create those milestones and deadlines. If that was a schedule that worked, then continue on with that schedule. Don't allow external forces to kind of force your work week or your work hours to bleed beyond what's comfortable for you.
That's interesting. So if I think back to Daisy's response and then your response right now to the prior two questions, it sounds like right now, particularly with remote work, it's important to be intentional, both with making sure that you are getting yourself out there with your colleagues, and to be very intentional about what your schedule is, what you can say no to, and making sure that you're very organized with your time.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think, I mean, there's a lot that's really difficult about the environment right now and about remote work. And I completely agree with Daisy that it can be incredibly isolating, particularly for people who are used to going into the office every day. But I also think that there are some really positive habits that can come out of it. For example, my company is now open. So we are back at work and at the office. And one of the things that I've discovered is, while I was remote working and I was spending time with my children, for example, it forced me to take breaks during the day, which I have now come to realize were really helpful mental breaks. And so now that I'm back at work and I actually do have uninterrupted time to work because my children are in childcare, I find myself now scheduling a 30-minute walk just to kind of clear my head and reset. And it has meant that my afternoon work is much more productive than it was before the shutdown. So I also think finding the things that are working in this new environment and carrying them on even after there's a return to whatever our new semblance of normal is could be really powerful.
Yeah, I think that intentionality is something that can be new for many people, because it's really easy to get used to work coming to you and just being kind of the passive person, and work is coming to you and you let it fill up your schedule. And it can be difficult, particularly in a situation where people are thinking, oh, you're working from home, you can do extra, to kind of make sure that you gain a little bit of control over this notion that 24/7 things are coming at me. And it's difficult to have those boundaries, as Daisy was talking to. It's difficult to control your schedule. And that's why working remotely it takes some new skill. It takes a skill of being able to have the boundaries, to take the pressure off yourself, to take control of your schedule to the extent possible that you can.
I think that's hard for some people. I know it's hard for me, and it's hard for a lot of my clients to internalize and to adapt to, because for so long the idea of flexibility, quote unquote, has been about boundarylessness. So the idea that, well, I could leave the office early today to make it to my kid's soccer game, and I have my device so I can check emails while I'm standing on the sidelines. That there's a blurring of the lines that's been very positive and has helped us a certain way towards flexibility. And now we're in some ways doing the reverse. We're saying, well, now we are at home. We do have the flexibility to get up from our home offices and, go see our kids if that's the situation. But if so, that means we also now have to we need to be quite rigid with ourselves about time and boundaries that we haven't been before. So I think we're sort of in flexibility 2.0. And that, it's something for all of us to really, really think about how we're adjusting to.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting point to think that now that we're working remotely, we actually need to develop schedules and set boundaries.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So Daisy, another question for you, and this is going to get back to this notion again of this flexibility 2.0. Companies are going to start to reopen, and some employees are choosing to return to the office while other employees would like to continue working remotely. And many companies, as I mentioned in the introduction to the webinar today, are allowing employees to have a choice. You can come back to the office or you can continue working remotely. How can an employee or a caregiver communicate to the organization and other stakeholders that they would like to continue working remotely, but they don't want to seem like somehow they're not a team player or they lack some kind of organizational commitment?
Yeah. So the key thing there is really to think about the perspective of the person you'll be speaking to. So if it's a raise your hand if you want to go back to the office and you're concerned about not raising your hand kind of thing, you have a very open, direct conversation with your manager, with your team about what you want to do. First of all, don't shy away from it. I know a lot of people feel like they need to be sort of hesitant or asking permission or whatever. Just come right out with it, because that's where we are right now, culturally, and it's the set of decisions we have to make. So be very direct. But as you do, be conscious of how that person is going to receive your request. And if you can frame your request or, your desire to work at home or not work at home in terms of what's going to be a solution and what's going to be a give to your manager or the company or organization, it's usually going to be really well received. So if you can say, listen, I have, young school-aged children, their school is going to be on a different schedule this coming fall. I know a lot of announcements haven't been made about that yet, but let's say hypothetically that's the case. And if I can continue working from home through that fall semester, what it will allow me to do is take the time I would spend commuting or having to figure out an extra childcare arrangement, and it will allow me to give you those hours back. Or, however you frame it, but something where it feels like it's a give. It's not, I want, it's not, I'm entitled to, it's not, why won't you let me? It's, I've thought through this really carefully, and I've thought about my own needs, but I'm framing my own needs in a way that's actually a win-win for both of us. And I think if you can do that, having worked in human resources for a long time and having been on the receiving end of a lot of requests for flexibility, the ones that tended to be very easy to say yes to were ones that looked like that. The just, what works for me is this, were a little harder to, to get your mind around.
I see. And then Kelsey, a very related question. Since you decided to become an entrepreneur, I know that sometimes there's this stigma of like, oh, well, you're just doing this because you want to be a full-time caregiver, and you've given yourself the label of entrepreneur or the label of freelancer because you really just want to stay at home and be a full-time caregiver, and you really are choosing not to go back to the traditional office setting. How do you communicate with people who have this maybe more traditional view that if you're not in an office, then you've taken the caregiver track?
Yeah, it's, it can definitely, there's I think a real potential for perception or stigma there. I particularly, now that we have a physical site, I think it's a little bit easier for me to articulate or to show to the outside world that I have a job that I'm going to. But when we were first getting started, there was no physical site. It was very difficult for me to show people what I was working on. And I think there was a real impression of, well, you're the primary caregiver and this is kind of a hobby that you're tinkering with and seeing if it's going to work out. And I think where I felt that the most was actually when we made the decision to go ahead and send our son to childcare. This was before Two Birds opened. I had gotten to a point where I felt like I had enough work during the day that I was really struggling to balance or to juggle both. And I think there was a real, question from a lot of people of, well, you're home all day, so why would you then go, spend the money to send your child to childcare if you can watch them and you have the flexibility to come up with your own schedule around your work? So I would suggest a couple of things. I think one is find a real support network for yourself who understand what it is that you're doing, whether that is your partner or your family or even a friend. I think you need to feel like you've got someone in your corner who really does respect and understand what it is that you're doing. And when you encounter that, you can kind of come back to and hear from somebody else, know what you are doing is real and is a job. And to some extent, they can also kind of be a marketer for you on that. I think sometimes it took the pressure, having my partner, for example, be able to speak to the work that I was doing sometimes took some of the pressure off of me feeling like I was constantly having to defend myself. And then the other thing that that I did start doing that I found helpful was when I couldn't do something, when I couldn't schedule a meeting or schedule a call, I didn't use my children as the excuse, even if it was because I knew that I was going to be otherwise tied up with my children. That was information that I didn't feel was necessary, and the explanation of why I was otherwise occupied. You know, if you think about it, and you're going to work from 8 to 5 every day, and someone asks for a meeting and you've got another meeting during that time, it's a pretty clear, you know, explanation of, oh, I'm sorry, I've already got something scheduled during that time. Can we schedule it for X, Y, and Z? So, you know, I think when you're working from home and when you've got your children with you, there's a feeling like you need to say, oh, I'm with my child, so I'm not able to schedule it. Or, oh, you know, my son is doing X and I need to be with him, and so can we schedule this meeting another time? And I just felt like that was oversharing of my own schedule, and it allowed me to set, you know, personal and professional boundaries in a way that was helpful. I am also not going to lie, I did sometimes have to take my child to a business meeting. It was definitely not preferred. I was in a unique position of it was actually marketing for exactly the company that we were trying to build. But I was really careful about when I chose to do that. I didn't, you know, I didn't do it without a lot of thought behind who I was meeting with and whether or not it was going to be, you know, how it was going to be received. But the times that I did have to do it, I think reinforced the fact that I was actually committed to the professional commitments. It was something that wasn't able to be rescheduled. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot about understanding for yourself that you are doing a real job and that it's not a hobby, finding people who support you on that and who can reinforce that for yourself, and carrying yourself in the professional world the same way that you would carry yourself in the professional world if you had a 9-to-5 job, and just knowing that behind the curtain, some of those meetings are meetings with your kids.
Yeah, that's it. That's very interesting. And the interplay here between the last couple of questions where more people are going to need to have this conversation about the reason why they would like to continue remote working rather than return to the office, and the notion of oversharing. You can pitch this as an opportunity for the organization, an opportunity for your managers, that you can do these extra things by continuing to remote work. But maybe you also don't need to go into all of the gory details about why you need to stay home. So balancing that idea of making it look like a give to the organization, that returning to work, if I don't do that, if I continue to work remotely, I can give you these things, and then not oversharing about some of the reasons why you actually need to stay home, instead of saying, I need to stay home because, you know, I have all these kid things to do. Instead, you know, turn it around, make it look like a give, and maybe protect some of that information. I think that's a really insightful point, Kelsey, because I know for myself, I'm not so good at doing that. I'll say, no, I can't have this meeting at this time because I'm going to play baseball with my son. Yeah, okay. And then a last question for both of you. And this is a question that the theme came up multiple times in the submitted questions that we received from registrants for the webinar. And I'm going to take this question and I'm going to put it in my own terms to kind of give some context to what people have submitted in their question. So I have a young son, and he's been distance learning since March. And now summer camps are all canceled. So, you know, what are you going to do? I've worked hard to ensure that he's engaged in his learning, that he's engaged in good activities, but I just can't get over the G word. I can't get over this guilty feeling that I'm letting him and my work colleagues down. So what advice do you have for people in similar situations who are searching for this right mix between remote work and their other responsibilities to lessen this G feeling, to lessen this guilty feeling? And Kelsey, we could start with you.
Sure. So the very first thing I'm going to say is it's not a one size fits all. I think what works for one parent or for one child may look very different from another family. I also think it depends quite a bit on the age of the children in terms of what the kind of interactions between the parent and the child are during the remote learning. But I think at the end of the day, I think I believe a lot of children will come out of this feeling, and there's obviously a lot to be studied and a lot that will come out about how children are understanding what the pandemic is and what that means for the world at large. But it also is a several month-long period where they get to spend time with their parents that they aren't typically spending with their parents. And I think particularly for young children, there is a way that they will come out of that period remembering it as a kind of joyful time with their parents. And so I think part of kind of overcoming this guilt is just remembering for every hour that you're spending with your child during the day, that's probably an hour that you weren't originally going to be spending with that child if you were at work. So there's a real value add or a real win for children in the extra hours of the day that they're getting to spend with their parents. And so just kind of remember that and have that in the back of your head. I always go back to this. I think one of the fastest routes to guilt, and this is speaking from personal experience, is trying to parent and work at the same time. It is so difficult. You feel like your focus is split in half. You feel like you're doing both halfways. Sometimes it's unavoidable. I'm not going to say it's always possible to set really clear boundaries and to only do one or the other. But I do think if you notice yourself going down this path of you are for the entirety of the day trying to do both simultaneously, trying to kind of reset or reassess and figure out if there are ways to pull an hour back that you can just be parenting or just be working is helpful. Yeah, I mean, and I think the other thing I was just going to say is there's a lot in terms of the children remote learning. There's so much out there right now in terms of remote learning and switching to virtual programs, whether that's on the education front or on the activities front, and whether it's through your school or through extracurriculars. I think there was, particularly in the beginning of the closures, kind of gangbuster, everybody rushed to do those. And I think what we're seeing now is it works for some children, for some parents, it really doesn't for others. And the longer you sit with this closure, the more you understand what works for your own schedule. And if the remote learning really doesn't work for your family, that's okay. And I'm not saying, abandon ship altogether or abandon school altogether, but if you have a child who really just has kind of remote learning fatigue and you need to take the day off the computer or off the screen and let them just run around outside, you are not going to be ruining their education for the rest of their life. And I think that's hard to remember sometimes. You feel like you kind of have to do everything.
Daisy, how about you?
So I think it's good to remember that guilt usually comes from us feeling like we're acting in opposition to our values. So if you're, to take an extreme example, you're a pacifist and you hit somebody, you're going to feel really guilty about it because you've acted in opposition to your values. Working parents and caregivers and people who are just working at home also now can feel a lot of guilt because they feel like whatever they're doing, they're sort of dropping the ball or acting in a way that they should, quote unquote, should be doing something else. So if you're working, maybe you feel like you should be helping your son with his distance learning homework, for example. So guilt is, another way to think about it is guilt is your conscience talking at you really, really loudly and saying, hey, do the right thing. But I think the important way to reframe it is to think about what you're doing that's in alignment with your values. So if you're, working very hard, as a professor, you're teaching classes, you just submitted a paper, you worked with a doctoral student, and yeah, you had to ignore your son for a couple of hours a day to do that. Well, that's actually in line with your values, because number one, it lets you earn a living and pay the mortgage and give your son a good life and an education and a house to live in. But number two, you're setting an example for him that, this is what professionals do. We're committed. And sometimes we have to do things we have to step away from some things to do other things. So I'm not trying to sugarcoat it in any way, but I think if you can reframe and say, this is in alignment with my values. You know what? I am a hard worker, but my colleagues will have to wait just for a little bit for me to get back on all those messages because I'm spending time with my toddler. I'm not acting in opposition to values. I'm just having to sequence them a little bit.
I see.
So I think that's important to remember. And another sort of specific hack or technique that I think it can be helpful to diminishing some of that guilt of feeling like you're always falling down behind the ball, not doing what you should, is keeping what I call a done list. So all of us have to-do lists. They're a million miles long. Looking at mine just makes me want to cry sometimes because there's so much on it. But if you can keep a list of the things that you've accomplished, like you took your, son to the batting cage this morning. Maybe you had a great mentoring talk with a colleague yesterday. You got the laundry done this week in your house, which is no joke either. If you can keep a list of things large and small that you've accomplished over the course of a week or a month, and then look back at that, you'll realize, wow, I'm really delivering in each of my different roles, even under some really pressured circumstances. And you'll have a feeling of buoyance instead of feeling sort of defeated by looking what's yet undone.
Jason, really quickly, I just wanted to add to that. I also think it's really easy to forget, as a parent, you know that one of your titles is that you are a parent, and the expectation is, I know how to parent, right? I've been doing it for X number of years. I think it's really easy to forget that this pandemic has meant that your parenting role has completely changed. So, a lot of parents, particularly those who go to work every day and whose children are in childcare or in school or even with a nanny or whatever, it is suddenly a very different proposition of how you are parenting now, where you are with your children all day long, as opposed to having time with them in the morning and having time with them in the evening and having time with them on the weekend. And I think it's really easy to forget that's a huge thing to learn in a very short span of time, of how to parent suddenly 24 hours a day with really no break. So I also think in terms of lessening the guilt, give yourself some understanding that this is a new job. Your parenting job has suddenly completely changed in terms of what you're expected to do. And it's okay if that's hard. I think I've heard from a lot of parents that they feel guilty or feel bad that being with their children all day long is really difficult, because they love their children, obviously, and they are parents and they feel like they should know how to parent. And it is a different way of parenting than what they are used to doing. And so I think it's okay to feel like it's hard. You shouldn't feel guilty about that.
That's great to hear. We have about 3 or 4 minutes left. Any parting thoughts, Daisy?
I would just encourage people to think about this specific time, and I guess this is building on what Kelsey just said, or adding my agreement to it. That what people are going through now, the shift from office work to remote work, the shift from having care to not having care, the shift to being in a really good, positive economy and business environment to being in a very, very pressured one. For many or most of us, this is the sort of greatest crucible of our adult lives. It's the most pressured point in time. So I would just, again, I'm going to sort of go back to where I started and encourage people to think about giving themselves a little bit of grace, a little bit of leeway, and accepting that you're not going to feel as if you're an A student, in every course right now. And that's just fine. The goal is to establish a system that works, that gets us through this difficult time. And then, as Kelsey really aptly said, to take the skills that you've built now into the future and help you whatever your work environment looks like next.
Very nice. Kelsey?
Yeah, two things. One, from the lens of kind of working parenthood, and then the other just from working in general in this remote environment. I think one of the kind of silver linings of of this period is, I think for those who have children, this is an opportunity for real transparency for children into what their parents do during the day. And Daisy had said something about kind of being in line with your values, and that work, for people who are working, it allows you to pay your mortgage, but it's also, it allows you to fulfill a lot of the values that you have as a working professional. And I think that's a real opportunity for showing your children what it is that is important to you. And obviously children are part of that, but if you are working, work is important to you. And I think it's okay and good for children to see that. And it's unusual that children are allowed to see what that actually entails over the course of the day. And so this is kind of a window into that I think can serve children really well in understanding what that means for their parents. And then the other thing that I was going to say about the remote work environment in general is, again, everybody is coming at this from kind of a different background. There are people with children, without children, with partners, without partners, who are used to remote work or who aren't. And so everyone is having a little bit of a different experience and a little bit of a new challenge. And so, you know, I think framing kind of your asks in terms of what you need, but also what you are able to give your company, I think is a really astute comment from Daisy. And I think on the receiving side of it, also understanding that some of the challenges you are facing, the person you are talking to may not be facing those same challenges. And so it may require a little bit of explanation for them to understand where you're coming from, or a little bit, if you're on the receiving end, a little bit of grace in understanding that they are having a different experience than you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I thank both Daisy and Kelsey and everyone involved in organizing this webinar. I know that I've certainly received some actionable tips from this last 45 minutes of conversation. And for those of you who are watching the webinar, I just want you to know the conversation doesn't have to end at the end of this webinar. You're more than welcome to reach out to myself or to Sean, and we can continue this conversation if you want to talk about something that's specific and unique to your particular experience. So thank you everyone very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.